Welcome to episode 8 and also the beginning of the breeding season. So in South Africa, we typically start conditioning the birds now in January with the idea that they get their nest boxes and that closer to the end of the month. There is, however, one or two pairs that have already got their boxes, as you can see in the background, and they were from the house of Baptista. And the reason being is that their sort of austerity period was November, not December, so they're a month ahead of the rest of the birds. So the birds where the hens, or the pairs should I say, where the hen's beak had gone black, have already got their boxes. And I'll be showing you what I mean by that when we discuss the majestic bloodline side. So we'll be talking about recognizing birds that are in condition today, so that you know when to pair up your birds. And then, so I'll be showing you how to prep the actual boxes as part of today's show. We're also going to be looking at Odo and Josephine's offspring from last season, and we're going to be picking which of those we're going to be keeping. So there were 6 cock birds, 2 of which are still in juvenile feather. So because they've taken a very long time to come into full adult colouring compared to their siblings, they're probably going to be 2 birds that I'll exclude immediately from holding back for my own breeding projects, as you ideally wanting birds that have got through the moult quickly and that are sort of therefore are in great health and all the rest of it. But out of the 4 that have fully coloured up, we're going to put them in show cages and we're going to scrutinise the birds in depth. We're going to be looking at their feet, their stance on the perch, we're going to look at their type, their feather quality, all that kind of thing in a lot of detail, and then make a decision together on 2 of them that we will keep, and then the other 2 will be offered to club members. So that's the plan for today. I hope you enjoy the show. It's probably going to be a bit longer than some of the previous episodes, so you might want to get yourself a cup of coffee or a pint of beer, whatever you'll fancy, and enjoy it. Right, so in terms of the majestic side of things, before we catch up with the individual pairs, I wanted to sort of take you through the process of knowing when the birds are in breeding condition, and therefore when is the right time to add a nest box to the cage. So I've, as you know, paired up some of the birds already, but while I was sort of going through that process between the last episode and today's episode, I was filming the whole sort of process as it was unfolding. So I'm going to show you segments of the various pairs as they've kind of progressed through that, so that you can learn to identify for yourself when your birds are coming into condition. I'm specifically showing you the green-backed birds because they are the easiest for beginners to start to recognize the telltale signs of hens in particular being in breeding condition, and some of the body language that you can pick up from your cock birds as well. So let's get started. So the first thing I do when I put a pair together is I'll start feeding them up with the conditioning food. Now, in last week's episode, I showed you how I make my green food, and initially I'll start giving that to them 2-3 times a week, and then I'll sort of build it up until eventually they're basically getting that every day. The egg food, however, I still only feed twice a week, and the reason being is the protein richness of the egg food can cause obesity, which you don't want prior to the sort of mating, because then it can affect fertility. So you don't want to be feeding excess amounts of egg food at this stage. And that's also why I like to separate the 2, besides the other reason that we spoke about last week, where the egg food, if it's with moisture, with the green seed and broccoli and stuff like that, that moisture can cause it to go off if you're not around to remove that during the day. So like myself, who works during the day, by the time I get home in the evening, if it's been a very hot day, that food's already gone sour, and that can cause disease. So I split the 2. But like I said, the other benefit is that I can help control the weight of the birds by not giving them stuff that's going to cause them to gain excess weight prior to them mating. All right, so we've put in the panikin seed. As you can see, here is the egg bit. making a meal out of the panicum seed. So besides the green food mixed, as I showed you, this is just the plain panicum, so I'll alternate that on days. And this keeps the bird's interest and sort of gives him some mental stimulation as well. The next sort of thing, once I'm happy that they're starting to come into condition, is that I start looking for different types of behavioral changes. So, for example, the cockbird here, you can see Louis, he was starting to pick up the odd bit of grass. So I'll deliberately put in a tiny, tiny amount of grass in the cage, and I'll see what the cockbirds do with that. If they start picking it up and sort of looking for somewhere to put it, then I know that they're starting to gain interest in possibly nesting. Whereas if you put grass into a cage with a pair and the cockbird is not ready to breed, you'll find that he ignores it. There's just no desire whatsoever to start building a nest or anything like that. So that's one of the body language tips that we can, or signs that we can look for in a cockbird. The hens are a little bit easier to tell. So you'll notice in this video clip with the hen bird, you'll notice that the beak was starting to go like a charcoal in colour. And this is particularly visible on greenback birds. Some of the colour mutation that's not as clear, unfortunately. But on the greenback birds, you can clearly see that darkening of the beak. And that is a sure sign that your hen bird is starting to come into breeding condition. By the time it's halfway through the breeding season, their beaks will be almost black. So that's a good way to tell if your hens are coming into condition. The other sort of thing or positive sign that you want to look for in that, has your pair actually bonded in some way? So if we look at the next clip, you'll see it's of the courtship dance, which is where the male bird sings to the hen, he shakes his head backwards and forwards, and then he starts hopping at least up and down. Now, a hen bird that's not receptive to that particular cockbird will immediately move away from the cockbird, whereas a hen that's accepted the cockbird will actually sit a little bit closer perhaps, she will face him. Sometimes the hen birds will also shake their heads, and their tails will twitch as well and are almost focused in on the male. So you'll see her whole body language is focused on the cockbird and what he's busy doing and displaying. All right, so that's the next sign that you really want to be seeing in your birds, to know that your pairings have worked, that they're compatible, because not all pairs that you put together will like each other, just like people. Some of them just will refuse point blank to breed. And then the next sign is that when you do now add a nest box, if you look at the next clip, you'll see that the birds immediately start to investigate the nest box. So both the cockbird and the hen bird will then start going to the opening of the box, peering inside, making sure that there's nothing dangerous in there, and they'll show a definite interest in the box. Whereas if I had to put a box on a cage with a pair that's not in breeding condition, they'll completely and utterly ignore it. And so those are just some of the ways that we as Gouldian breeders know that the birds are coming into condition or are in condition ready to breed. So I hope that's kind of made sense to you. Now, coming back to what's happening at the moment with the majestic pairs. So Charlotte and Louis, they've built a nest, but I haven't seen the eggs as yet. So they still got a week or two probably to go, or it could be from tomorrow already, we don't know, but they haven't quite started laying eggs. However, Egbert and Victoria have already laid 4 eggs, and she has started incubating. So what do I mean by, or how do I know that she started incubating? So what will typically happen, remember with Gouldians, they lay a complete clutch, and only once the complete clutch is laid will they start incubation. So typically what will happen is, and you might see it with this top pair, Alfonso and Beretta, you haven't met them yet, but they, in and out the box, they have also started laying eggs, but they're not, one of them is not always in the box. Okay, so they're in and out. the cockbird will spend a bit of time in there during the day, but the hen bird's not really spending any time in there except in the morning when she's laying eggs. Whereas these two, she's absent 90% of the time. They will alternate. So the cockbird will relieve the hen while she comes and feeds. And at night, and that's the critical part, is that she's now missing at night, as in she's in the box. And that is how we know that incubation has started. And then once that starts, you start counting the days until they actually hatch, which is typically 14 to 16 days they should hatch. I don't like to interrupt them once they start incubating. So I check my nest boxes once a week, and I don't recommend you check them more often than that because you'll put them off breeding. But when I check, I'm looking to see, is there any eggs, and if so, how many? And because I know when I switch off the lights at night whether the hens have started incubating or not, I can then calculate, okay, the first egg was laid on whatever the date might be by working 1 day back per egg. And then when I see the hen actually starting to incubate, I then can calculate how many eggs, based on when the first egg was laid and when she started incubating, roughly there should be in the clutch. And then I know roughly also when they're likely to hatch. So there's no need for me to check on her again. The next time I will open their box will be once that due date for the eggs to hatch has passed, that I can check how many eggs were fertile, how many have hatched, and then also confirm that I was right roughly on the date of hatching, and then I can calculate how many days I must now wait until I'm ready to ring the birds. And it's important what I'm telling you now, that you do not want to be checking your nest every single day. The biggest mistake that most new Gouldian finch breeders make is that they're very excited for the breeding season. They want to know what's happening and they inspect the nests. And they might have every good intention to only inspect on a Sunday or whatever day it is that they've chosen, but then I know the hen's missing, so they check again. And I know but this, and they check again. And so they keep going, and the next thing they're checking 3-4 times a week. And then the next thing they're posting on groups, I know but my pair has abandoned the eggs. They're chucking chicks out. And 9 times out of 10, it's that the keeper is at fault. And that the keeper is too active around the nest. So if I can give you one tip at all, is try and keep away from the nest boxes, especially once the hen starts to incubate. Leave them alone. There's nothing you can do that's going to change the date that they hatch. There's nothing that you need to be doing in that box, and all you're doing is you risking them abandoning their nest every time you look. So avoid that. All right, so coming back to them, I'm digressing quite a bit today. But yeah, so they to summarize on 4 eggs. They've got 3 eggs so far, but they're still busy laying, so they haven't started incubating yet. And then our black-headed pair, Charlotte and Louise, they haven't laid their clutches yet, but I'm expecting the first eggs any day now. All right, so we said we were going to evaluate the birds. You'll see I've labelled the cages 1 to 4, and these are 4 brothers. Now there was 2 other cock siblings, but they haven't come through the molt yet, or the colouring up. So it tells me that they're sort of slower molters, which isn't necessarily something that we want. So you want birds that are quick molting because it gives you an idea that they're in better sort of health. So these are the 4 that we're going to be looking at today. Now we're going to use the show standards to evaluate the birds. However, we don't need to worry about certain things like plumage condition in terms of missing feathers or something along those lines, or maybe toenails that are too long or something, because those are things that would molt out or can be changed or sorted. So it's not important for picking birds that you're keeping for breeding. However, the parts of the show standards that we are going to scrutinize these birds against is things like color, overall shape or type, size, head shape, beak shape, all that kind of thing. Make sure that there's no deformities on the feet, all that kind of stuff. So that's the aspects of the show standards that we are going to be looking at. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to film each bird individually, and then we will call those up and discuss them in fine detail. I'll point out what I'm talking about, and then we'll come to a decision ultimately from there.
All right, so there's a couple of things that stand out about this guy straight away. So first of all, you'll notice that he is in great feather in terms of plumage and condition, but you'll notice that he starts to sort of lean forward on the perch quite a bit, so his position isn't that great. And the net effect of that is when he drops his head, he's got this almost hunchback or hump look, which we refer to as a sort of a roche back, and there's a slight sort of dip that then forms behind the head by the neck as he's sort of twisting his head up. Now, I did have a look at him in the sort of normal cage, and he doesn't do that when he's in a conventional cage. So, you know, from a show bird perspective, that would definitely count against him. But as a breeder, as a breeder bird, it's not necessarily a problem because it's not actually a physical thing as such. It's just the way he carries himself on the perch when he's under stress in the show cage. So perhaps a bit more training in the show cage would sort that out. If we have a look at the head, though, moving on, it's fairly well rounded, so that I like about him. But there is a slight sort of kink between where the beak meets the sort of forehead, if you like. And as a result, I would have to sort of deduct a couple of points in terms of the head shape, although it's not bad. And the fact that he's not flat-headed I like as well, because a lot of birds these days you sort of see that flat head look. From a tail perspective, he does tend to cock it ever so slightly, but not badly, and he carries his wings nice and close. Color-wise, which is quite an important thing with Gouldians, the yellow is nice and bright, the green and the blue tail and the green sort of on the back is nice and clean. The purple could be a shade darker, but not bad at all. Right, so bird number 2. This bird, you'll notice straight away, he's very elongated. So he's taken after his father, unfortunately. But size-wise, both him and the previous bird are very good sized birds. When compared to sort of your sort of pet shop size, these guys are way closer to what we're looking for, which is between 120 and 140 millimeters. However, you'll notice that he does drop his wings a little bit, and you'll notice that he's cocking his tail. The back line from the head down the back, though, he doesn't have that sort of bump on the back, and his neck is sort of better. So from that perspective, he's slightly better. But that elongated sort of belly and that would definitely be not what we're looking for in terms of the type. Head shape's not bad. The beak's a little bit better in terms of the flow compared to the other bird. Color-wise, once again, the purple could be a shade darker in my opinion, but the yellow is not bad. The green is a little bit less uniform than the previous bird. The other bird definitely had the better color in terms of the feathers and that. But yeah, not a bad bird, but you would have to sort of pair him up very carefully to maybe a more cobby bird to counteract that sort of very elongated look. So yeah, that would be my comments about this particular chap. Yeah, his wings, you'll see now when he's sort of relaxed slightly more, aren't as bad as at right in the beginning of the video. He has pulled them a little bit closer to his body. And both him and the first bird had quite sort of tight feathering. They didn't have a sort of a rough look to the belly feathers and that. So from that perspective, the feather quality on the birds is good, which is quite an important sort of aspect in terms of picking breeders, because you're wanting a bird that's going to pass on good quality. This bird, on the other hand, it is missing a feather on the breast. The breast color, though, is slightly darker. But remember, missing feathers, we said, isn't really important for picking a breeder, but it would obviously be for a show. This bird's a lot less steady in the show cage, so from a show perspective, it wouldn't be great. His position on perch is a little bit more upright than, well, certainly the first bird, but even the second bird. But you'll notice that the head is not great on this particular bird. It's a little bit more snaky, and he's also got a sort of a more elongated look. So yeah, not ideal from those perspectives. Also, if I look closely at his feathering, there's definitely slight edging on the green and in the purple. And that combined with the yellow and on the sort of belly area being the yellow feathers are quite sort of coarse, if you like, and rough. I would say that this bird's starting to lean towards sort of being buff-feathered. So remember, in canaries, they tell a buff-feathered bird by looking for that frosting on the tips of the feathers. The buff feathers are a broader feather and a more sort of fluffy feather, if you like, which works well depending on what sort of canary you're breeding in that. But in a Gouldian, we're looking for tight, neat feathering. So to have sort of a rougher feathered bird is not a good thing. And for that reason, more than anything else, I would rather favor the first two birds than this particular bird for that reason, even though the first two had their own sort of fair share of problems. Remember also, I'm being hypercritical here. In a show scenario, it would be up against peers, and those could have more extreme faults than these birds. So, you know, you've got to take it depending on what's on show on the day. But from a breeding perspective, we can afford to be a bit choosy. This bird, yeah, he's not bad. He's got a little bit of a better head than number 3, but not perfect in terms of the roundness. His belly is not as bad as the previous, or number 2, should I say. It's a little bit more rounded. But once again, if we look at the feathers, you can see that the belly yellow feathers are quite coarse, rough feathering. And then there's that ever so sort of slight frosting. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Hey guys, so I hope you found that as interesting as I did. It just shows you that not all birds are cut out to be showbirds in terms of their temperament and the way they behave in a show cage, as we saw with bird number 1. But the important lesson here is to evaluate each and every one of your birds and decide what is going to be beneficial to your bloodline based on your current sort of shapes and that kind of thing, and what you need to sort of use to enhance your bloodline. And then obviously, ideally, you would like a bird that's both a showbird and a ideal breeder, but it doesn't necessarily always mean that one will equal the other. So basically the way I go about preparing my nest boxes, so first of all I make sure that the nest box is completely clean. There's no residual mess from the season before. I scrub them out just using a normal kitchen pad, and then once they're properly clean, I'll then spray them with a vet disinfectant, and I'll then leave them to dry out thoroughly before I add or do anything else with them. Alright, so the next thing I'll do once they're nice and clean is, before I put them on to a cage, I'll then take some of the nesting material. I use mountain hay, but there's various different ones that you can use, and I will put a layer of grass in the actual box. Now, don't stress too much if you get lots of grass hanging out on the outside. That's part of what tells the bird that there's a potential nest site. Okay, and I will continue to do this add grass until it's roughly covered as such. So there's a thin layer of grass covering the bottom of the box, and a little bit going up the sides and that, but it's hardly finished. This, however, the bits of grass sticking out and whatever, is what triggers the birds to now go and investigate the box and see what's happening as a potential nest site. What I will do is when I add the box, I will then add a good couple of handfuls of grass into the cage, and I'll let the cockbird build the rest of the nest himself. By doing this, I've at least got a foundation, so even if he's a very bad nest builder and they start laying eggs, the fundamentals are already in place. So yeah, that's what I do in terms of prepping the actual nest boxes. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. I know I did, and we'll see you next week.